Recording in
I was under the direction and guidance of Reverend Sawyer when I was a young girl, less than 15 years old. And I was always impressed, first of all, how he was a family man. His family came first. I watched his discipline over how his family was to set an example for the people around them. His four little girls were the sweetest little girls, and they were all very well behaved. His wife was the quintessential wife. And you say something to her about Reverend Sawyer, and she'd always smile with that beautiful big smile. And she said, "Well, that's Daddy." And I remember that. And growing up, I started looking for relationships that would be basically the same thing. And then it spills over into his shepherd and the way he shepherded his flock. Now, a lot of people had a difficult time with that for the simple reason that they were not accustomed to a man of the word, because Reverend Sawyer ruled with the word. The weapon of his spirit was always the word of God. They would always ask the question, why does he go back and forth to that discipline? Well, they had no earthly idea that he had two: the Holy Bible and the United Methodist discipline. And when the discipline conflicted with what the Bible would say, the Bible always won out. And he would always tell us, don't take my word for it. Read it yourself. Pray over it yourself. Let the word saturate your mind, and it will come to you. If you recognize who God is, you'll see God, you'll hear God, you'll experience God. But if you want to be God yourself, that will not happen. Then we had structure. His ministry put a lot of structure in a lot of people's lives, and they didn't like that, because they were used to playing God. They were the little tiny gods, and they always wanted to rule. And Reverend Sawyer was not going to have that.
The Trenton family is big on holiday traditions.
Head and not the tail. And he made sure that they knew that they were not ruling that flock. And a lot of them had problems with that too. But he would always beat you down with that Bible. And we always used to laugh and say, uh-oh, here comes that holy spanking again. Because he'd tell them, and it would get away with them so bad they'd get mad. But he knew how to bring you under conviction with the word. He didn't talk about you himself. He used the word. One time, somebody was saying something, and it surprised us all that they said it. And the comment came out, "Whew, even God would use a crooked stick to straighten out a mess." And we all fell out laughing. But that was the perfect opportunity for Reverend Sawyer to come back with a whole sermonette. And the room got hot because the word was flowing and nobody could understand why. And because they had never really been exposed to the move of the Spirit. And whenever it started happening, they were afraid of it. And most of the people never did recognize the move of the Spirit. They couldn't understand how when he prayed for people, things happened. And I mean, things that you can only say were moves of God. He would always tell us that he was a tool, an instrument through which God worked. And he'd lay hands on the sick, and there were times that they recovered. Everything happens in God's will. But there were people who were comatose, even one in a coma. And he laid his hands on him and he started to sway and he started to pray and he started to sweat. But when he got through, he was drenched. But guess what? That person was awake. He did that with the baby that was sick. And that baby fully recovered. And all he said is, if you lay hands on the sick, they will recover. We had people in the church who had mental instabilities. He was able to shepherd them in such a way that they became stable. He was able to show us how we were dealing with spirits and principalities and demonic forces. And he taught us how to recognize it. And those of us who paid attention were able to work through things, using the word and praying to God to get that help. So it was real interesting. And then those of us who were getting married, because when they left St. Matthew, Reverend Sawyer continued to be my pastor. I grew and I grew and I grew, and I was thirsty for that growth. And he used to always call me daughter this and daughter that. And he said, "Daughter, did God tell you that?" And we'd always laugh because a lot of times, we try to say the devil said it, but he's not. Do you think that the devil said that? And going back to one other thing that was very, very interesting, I always remember he would always ask you after he taught, "Now, what did you hear?" And a lot of people couldn't understand that. But I understood it. And I used to always laugh when they didn't know what he had said because the anointing was not on the word for them. Or if they heard it, they chose not to receive it. So, I mean, up until recently, whenever I talked to him last, he still was asking, now, what did you hear? And then, the shock came. One night we were having family night at St. Matthew, and he got to the piano and he started to play. That's the first big shock. And then the second big shock, and it was such a funny thing. He started singing, I can't stop loving. And he held the note, God. And we fell out laughing because we thought it was going to be something else. But he tore our house down. We had church that night, and that was the very first time that everybody in that building was on the same accord. And it was such a mighty, mighty move. But it's sad that, you had people who wanted to control, and we all know that Reverend Sawyer was not one to be controlled. Reverend Sawyer was only going to listen to what God's directions were and was going to only follow God's direction. So unfortunately, they left St. Matthew and St. Mark, but there were so many people who were heartbroken and torn up over that because we had lost the first shepherd that every last one of us could connect with, except those who wanted to run the show. So it was just a heartbreaking thing. And I made it a point when I got married to take my new husband to meet Reverend Sawyer. They became fast friends. My husband is a mighty man of God too. And, they would always counsel each other and talk. And it became such a beautiful experience. And then to watch his young little girls who are always so quiet, and Miss Sawyer always taking them to different lessons and different things like that, to watch them blossom into beautiful and extremely intelligent professional women, and to still live according to what thus saith the Lord. And it was just a good example. And I hope it's been a good testimony as to why I love each and every one of them. Because they were not just your pastor and his family. They became your family too. And I remember Miss Sawyer cooking me that meal when we went up there for Reverend Sawyer to meet my husband. Mushrooms, spring onions, rice, celery, and I don't know what kind of spices that were, but it was a heavenly dish, and I have never forgotten those kinds of things like that. They both set examples for all of us. And his family now is a living testimony as to his walk with God and how he took care of where he laid his head first. Therefore, he was not considered to be an infidel. And I just have been so thankful to God to have placed someone like that in my life, to where now that he's gone, what the lessons that he taught are now even more powerful than they were when he was teaching them. And I guess I'll end my reflection with, what have you heard me say? Okay, there was one instance where we had a church member who was under the influence of demonic forces. And he had tried to commit suicide several times, and they called Reverend Sawyer, and he'd go and he'd find him on the side of the road laying flat with a Bible across his chest and all that. And it just brings to my memory that demon was cast out. You remember the story in the Bible where it talks about the demon was cast out and he went and he couldn't find anything but dry places. And he decided that he had to go back. But when he went back, he took 7 demons with him worse than he was. And they say the fate of that person was worse than it was the first time. And that's exactly what happened, in this instance, because all mhm, all you could see was that this person was given in to the demonic influences, and this person finally succumbed to the demonic influences. And it taught us all a lesson to where, you know, once you have encountered that and you've been freed, you got to stick with God. You got to keep your hand in God's hand. You can't go back to doing the same things you were doing before, thinking that, well, I've been saved and I've been delivered, and that's all I need to worry about. Because the fate of that young man was indeed worse than it was the first time around, because he passed on. And we can only pray that he was able to ask for forgiveness and to be delivered. Let's hope that, that's what happened anyway. He was a nice young man, but you can't live in the world and live in the spirit too. And that's exactly what happened. So again, I asked the question, what did you hear me say? Wisdom. He discerned that people were out of order. He came down off the wall. He told them the ways of righteousness. And then he went back up on the wall because then the blood was no longer on his hands. A lot of them didn't like it. They didn't like being chastised. But you can make the comparison that Reverend Sawyer's experiences were dual. He was responsible for his church members, and he was also responsible for his student bodies as a secondary school administrator. So he didn't have a problem calling you down, telling you when you were incorrect. And a lot of times, it's just like when a parent really has to peg a child for doing wrong. That child thinks that they've been called out and been done wrong. But that's embarrassment and that's conscience kicking in. But they had a difficult time doing that. And that's called tough love. But he always ended it with a smile. And then if it was real good, he did the ho 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 ho. And again, I say to you, the joy of the Lord was his strength. And again, what did you hear me say?
Throw out the lifeline. Throw out the lifeline. Someone is seeking a way. Oh, throw out the lifeline. Throw out the lifeline. Someone is drifting away. Throw out the lifeline. Throw out the lifeline. Someone is sinking today. Oh, throw out the lifeline. Throw out the lifeline. Someone is drifting drifting away. Throw out the lifeline. Throw out the lifeline. Someone is sinking today. I believe I'll say it one more time. Throw out the lifeline. Throw out the lifeline. Someone is drifting away.